Okay, so let's dive into a story about a single horrifying event that, in a way, helped reshape an entire nation. It's a story about tragedy, sure, but it's also about injustice and about the incredible wave of change that rose up from the ashes. It all starts with this number 146. That's how many people, most of them young immigrant women and girls, went to work one morning and just never came home. They all died on a single afternoon in Manhattan, in a fire that absolutely should not have happened. A reporter on the scene, Bill Shepard, he understood it instantly. Looking at the devastation, he wrote that this wasn't just a random accident. It was an answer to every worker who had begged for safer conditions, only to be completely ignored. So let's go back. We're talking March 25th, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. This wasn't just a fire. This was the spark that lit a fuse across America. The scene was just a complete nightmare. And when you look at the details, you realize every single part of it was preventable. The factory doors chained shut from the outside. The fire escape, it was so flimsy it collapsed almost immediately. Even the life nets the firefighters tried to use just ripped apart. And the managers who had the keys to those doors, oh, they saved themselves. They got out and left the workers trapped inside. A former Triangle worker turned labor organizer, Rose Snyderman, she just summed it all up with this raw grief and anger. She said this was a symptom of a much bigger problem, a system where profits were sacred, but the lives of the people actually making those profits, they were cheap. And what happened right after the fire didn't bring any closure, not at all. In fact, it just fanned the flames of public outrage even higher. To really get why people were so furious, you have to look at what happened just a year before this. These exact same workers, they went on strike. And what were their demands? Union recognition, better pay, and safer working conditions. The owners' response? They said it was all too expensive. They called the cops and broke the strike. I mean, the very safety measures that could have saved 146 lives were literally dismissed as a bad investment. So after the fire, the owners, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, were finally dragged into court on manslaughter charges. The city, really the whole nation, was watching, just hoping for some kind of justice. But justice never came. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and then acquitted them. That verdict just sent a shockwave across the country. For so many people, it was proof that the system wasn't just a little flawed. It was completely broken. The tragedy and that verdict became this massive rallying cry. It was obvious something had to change, and a new kind of reformer was ready to answer the call. They were called muckrakers. You can think of them as the really tough investigative journalists of their day. They used these popular magazines and books to shine a super bright, unflinching light into the darkest corners of American society, exposing all the rot that many powerful people wanted to keep hidden. You see, journalists like Ray Stannard Baker were so effective because they didn't just write about feelings or suspicions. They gave the public hard evidence, facts, stories, proof that confirmed what everyone already suspected was true about the crazy levels of wealth and corruption. And this had been building for a while. Decades before the Triangle Fire, you had guys like Jacob Riis setting the stage. His book, How the Other Half Lives, used these shocking photographs to show middle-class Americans what life was really like in the city's slums. He proved that words and pictures could actually change laws. And then you have Upton Sinclair. In 1906, he wrote The Jungle. Now, his goal was to show everyone how badly workers were being exploited and hopefully convert people to socialism. But the book ended up hitting America somewhere else entirely, right in the stomach. His descriptions of how food was being made, the filth, the disease, the rats in the meat, it was so graphic and disgusting that nobody could ignore it. He described it as a crime committed in a dungeon, and he had just blown the doors wide open for everyone to see. And the public outcry was insane. It was so huge that it led directly to the government passing the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. It's this perfect illustration of the pipeline from a muckraker's expose to actual real-world reform. Sinclair famously joked, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit it in the stomach." But it wasn't just journalists raising the alarm. There was another powerful movement stirring in America's churches. And it was challenging the very idea of what it meant to be a person of faith in this new industrial world. And it all started with this simple but totally revolutionary question. It was posed by a Kansas minister, Charles Sheldon, in his huge best-selling novel from 1896. And that question became the moral center of this new religious movement. They called it the social gospel, and the central idea was pretty radical back then. It argued that your faith wasn't just about saving your own soul for the afterlife, it was about trying to save society right now. It was a call for Christians to get involved, to challenge injustice, and to help people who are struggling. One of the most powerful voices in this movement was a pastor named Walter Rauschenbusch. And he wasn't just preaching from some comfortable suburb. He was a pastor in Hell's Kitchen in New York, one of the poorest and roughest neighborhoods around. He saw the suffering that politicians were just ignoring, and he argued that faith demanded a response. So Rauschenbusch's big idea was that society itself could be sinful. Sins weren't just individual choices, he said, but our collective failures. Things like letting children work in dangerous factories or allowing families to live in horrible slums. He believed it was a Christian's duty to try and redeem society from these collective sins. So after all this outrage, all this activism from journalists and pastors, what was the lasting legacy of this incredible era of reform that was sparked by so much tragedy? Well, the legacy is complex. On the one hand, this progressive movement achieved amazing things. It led to new laws for food safety, workers' rights, and housing standards. But, and this is so important to remember, it had these huge, glaring blind spots. The vision for a better America often left a lot of people out. Most reformers were totally silent on issues like women's right to vote or the systemic oppression of African Americans, Native Americans, and other minority groups. The history of the Triangle Fire leaves us with this powerful echo, one that you can still hear in today's debates about worker safety and corporate responsibility and the job of journalism to hold power accountable. It seems the work of exposing injustice is never really finished. It just evolves. And that brings us to a final question to think about.